When we want to create calculations in Analysis Services, we go to our Cube Designer, and then the third tab is the Calculation Designer. When we open the Calculation Designer for the first time, we'll see a command already there called Calculate. That Calculate command needs to stay in place. If we take it away, then Analysis Services won't be able to calculate these aggregated values from our fact table rows. So we'll just leave that where it is. Now on the toolbar, we have 3 buttons for creating new calculations. And there's 3 types of calculations that we can add: a calculated member, a named set, and a new script command. We're going to learn about calculated members in this demonstration. Now we're currently in Form View, which gives us boxes or drop-down lists to set the properties for this calculation. We need to give it a name, and notice that we have braces in place, which are required anytime the name of our calculation has a space embedded in it, or if it begins with a numeric value. We're going to call this sales amount. So we'll leave the braces in place and type in the name. Now this calculation will be another measure. That is, we'll be able to put it in the browser alongside our other measures and have it calculate by any dimension that we place on rows or columns or in the filter area. It is possible to create calculations that are non-measure calculations. We'll take a look at an example of that in a separate demonstration. So at minimum, we need to have a name and an expression. Our expression is simply a reference to the different cells that we have. Quite simply, if we go back to look at our browser, we have an expression that returns internet sales amount and another expression that returns reseller sales amount. And it does that row by row using that same expression, sort of like we saw in our Excel workbook. So all we have to do in our expression is reference a measure, which we can see down in the bottom left pane. We have calculation tools, and we can expand the internet sales folder and take internet sales amount and drag and drop that measure into our expression. And we can see the reference here is to the measure's dimension, dot, and then the name of the measure itself. That is a cell reference to internet sales amount that will change row by row and column by column depending on how we're displaying information in our browser. We want to take that value and add it to reseller sales amount. So we just use a plus sign here so we can perform normal mathematical operations between 2 different measures. So this time we'll use reseller sales amount and drag and drop it into the expression box. And so now we have a formula that's very similar to the formula we saw in Excel, where we're referencing one cell, internet sales amount, and adding that value to another cell, reseller sales amount. And those cell values will be calculated row by row and column by column. And while we're here, another good property to set is the format string. Just like with our measures, it's a good idea to set the format string for our calculations so that the value displays nicely in the presentation layer. We also have a property for visibility. If we're using this particular calculation to build up other calculations, then we might want to make it not visible for our users. But in this case, we'll keep it visible. The non-empty behavior is a property that you can safely ignore. The associated measure group would be useful if we have a particular measure that we want to include in the same folder when the user is viewing measures in the metadata tree. But in this case, we're using calculations from both of our measure groups, so it doesn't really make sense to choose one over another. On the other hand, if we wanted to create a display folder just for certain calculations, we could type in the name of a display folder here, and it would show up alongside the internet sales and reseller sales folders. We have other properties for color and for fonts, but we'll look at those in a separate demonstration.